Hi, I'm Chris Nessie from the House of Ed Tech Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, everybody, and good evening to all of y'all. Thank you so much for joining us today on our midweek show. Again, I am so thankful for each and every single one of you that join us, week in and week out with our amazing guests. And thank you so much, as always, for all of your support and for making my EdTech life what it is today. And today, I am so excited. We have a wonderful guest, and many of you may already be recognizing her on the screen. I know that I've been blasting this out on Twitter. I've gotten a lot of retweets and a lot of likes, and I'm just really excited today because I have the amazing, the wonderful, the energetic Katie Novak, who is here with us today. And I am just so excited and thrilled. Katie, how are you doing this evening?
I didn't realize that we were starting off with like a music video. That was so fun.
Thank you.
Getting into it, I was like, oh my God. I feel as though now I need a music video that like we can like trail out. I'll just do it live though.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, no, but I'm just so excited. Thank you so much. Katie, again, how are you doing today? How's everything?
I am doing so well. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to chat and, to share about like the work that I love.
Oh, exactly. And that's one of the main things also that I wanted you on the show because, as always, I am one of those that when I hear something or, something that is out there, something that is proven, something that is working, and I get some great feedback and then I hear podcasts and again, I do my research. It's something that I want to dive into a little bit more and know more about. And I know that if I have questions about it, there are other people that may have questions that may not be familiar. So thank you again for accepting the invitation to come here and talk about the amazing work that you're doing in regards to UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and for multi-tiered systems of supports, MTSS. So I'm really excited to get into that. But Katie, just in case there may be some viewers that are viewers that are watching right now, or that will be rewatching or listening later, that may not be familiar with who you may be, please give us a brief introduction as far as who you are, your context in education. And if you can, Katie, can you add one interesting thing about yourself that people may not know?
Okay. So I'm Katie Novak. I'm a lifetime educator. I started off as a high school English teacher, and then I was a middle school English teacher. I was in the classroom for 13 years before I transitioned to being a reading coordinator, an ELL director. And then for the previous 6 years, I was an assistant superintendent of schools. And throughout that incredible journey, always a teacher at my heart, like teaching students, teaching and learning from colleagues, right? It was always like, how do I best meet everyone's needs, which is literally impossible if you're using any single strategy. And so I learned about Universal Design for Learning when I was a classroom teacher. And I had an opportunity to be trained by kind of the mothership of, UDL, Dr. David Rose, and learned about the framework. And it like really made so much sense because Universal Design for Learning is essentially about three core things. Number one, this concept of variability, that like we are different from each other, but also like every single one of us is like so incredibly dynamic that like what I need is actually different from day to day. And it's almost like we're being set up when we're teaching a one size fits all lesson with any intention of that working equally well for this incredibly and beautiful diverse group of learners. So when I first learned about UDL and I learned about like, you're already designing learning for students and you're working way too darn hard for it not to be effective for all kids. So how do you design it so it's more flexible, so it works for everyone universally? And that being said, these other two core components, which are pretty cool, is like, even though there's this variability, we all need to work towards these same firm goals. We have the same goals for everyone. So it's kind of like, if all of us want to get to the top of the mountain, How many pathways are there that will allow us to climb up? And as a teacher, I don't feel like puppeteering and telling every one of you which pathway to take, because I don't know what you need right this second, because it literally could be different from what you needed like 5 minutes ago. So the last part of this framework is really embracing expert learning and encouraging autonomy and agency. And so it comes down to, as a teacher, as an administrator, now I consult full-time. I'm also a graduate instructor at University of Pennsylvania. And it's all about, how do we embrace the variability of the people we serve? How do we really focus on what is it that we want everyone to know and do? And how many pathways can we create so that people are able to reflect and choose what they need when they need it to work towards that goal? And so I experienced that as a teacher, and then experienced that as an administrator, and really thinking about, how do we carve all these different pathways so that teachers have the support and the professional development and the relationships that they need to be successful. And now my classroom just is bigger because I get to work with adults all over the world. So it went from being a teacher to being an administrator. Now I'm focused on consultants and being a graduate instructor. And I also, as an English teacher, like growing up, I had this dream of being like flippin' Judy Blume. Like I was going to be the greatest writer. And I tried my hand at fiction, and, I haven't figured that out yet, but I have been able to find great joy in writing about education. I've written 10 books that all focus on, how do we better design learning that represents the lived experiences of our learners, and not do a lot of things for our learners that they're so capable of doing themselves. And one interesting fact about me, I want to make it good because there's like so many fun ones. Okay. So, I never do laundry ever. And like, it's like a thing. Like I married this like amazing partner who like laundry is like his thing and not my thing. But the funny story about this is that once he was on a business trip for like a few days, and I like perceive myself to be rather capable and like a strong woman. And, he came home and looked in the laundry room and there was nothing there, and was like, Kate? I'm like, yeah. He's like, did you do the laundry? Now this is like how bad it is, because we've been together for almost 20 years. And I was like, yeah. And he looked at me stone cold and he goes, you know how? Like totally serious. So as much as there may be a perception that sometimes I have it all together, the trick is that I work hard at the things that are important, and then I let the laundry just pile up in the background.
Oh, that is great. That is such a wonderful fact. So that's wonderful that you have an amazing husband that does the laundry for you. That's one less thing to worry about. So kudos to him. And of course, kudos to you for all your amazing work. So like I said, I'm really excited to get and dive into, what you do best, which is UDL and MTSS. But before we do that, Katie, I always like to get to know our guests, and I always love for our audience members to know our guests a little bit more. So for example, for myself, I love to talk about the origin story. I want to know, Katie Novak, where did the inspiration to go into education come from? Was this something that is from family, or did you have that one teacher that just sparked that interest for you to go into education? Let me know, or let us know, what got you into education.
So I think it was probably a little bit of both. Both my parents are teachers. So,
Okay.
But I never thought I was going to be a teacher. And, people actually are like, oh, you must have loved school. I did quite appreciate the social aspect of school, but I was like a C's get degrees. And so I like didn't really apply myself academically. And as a result, I was not like elevated and celebrated into this upper echelon of like honors classes. Like, I was always in what we called like CP2, which was just like, the regular class. And then there was honors, and then there was AP, and that was like not my bag. And, I look back on report cards now, and, solid, like if I was lucky, I'm going to pull a B minus. I was a gym class hero, so always A+ in PE, but like, a lot of B minuses, C's, a couple of D's when I struggled. And I was a nice kid. And so like, I would get like a 68 as a final grade, and the teacher would be like, pleasure to have in class. So I like knew how to do just the right amount of work to get by. And that's kind of like how I rolled. And so, I didn't really have huge plans. Both of my parents went to college. I was going to go to college, but I definitely wasn't like, yeah, this is where I want to be. And so senior year, Mrs. Krause, nemesis, right? I love this woman more than like anything. But like when I first met her, she was my English teacher my senior year. And again, I'm rolling into like CP2, whatever the level was. And we would just all like, mess around. And she was so amazing because she's like, I want you to know that there's just so many different pathways. And I don't want you to regret like not knowing how to take a pathway. So you're all going to learn how to fill out a job application and like sit for an interview. You're all going to learn like what the process is for like military recruitment. And you're all going to learn how to fill out a college application. And at a very early part of the year, she had us all write like some college essay, which, who knows what I wrote about. But she was like, took me aside and was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Like, this is so good. And like, I know that you're capable of so much more. And like, you still have a lot of work to do with like the kind of like the language conventions and like the actual construction, but your ideas are brilliant. And I'm going to tell you what, like, I already called your house and we're going to put you in the honors class. I'm like, what? Like, that's crazy talk. We're not going into the honor. And she's like, no, I talked to your parents. Like, you're so capable. And this is why I am such a fierce advocate of full inclusion, is what was happening in that class was so much different than anything I had ever experienced. Like, seeing classmates work and seeing people like work really hard. And she's like, I will support you however long you need to be supported. But like, you are a brilliant person. And like, I'm not going to let you waste it. Like, you're wasting it. You're just riding it. And so I like got into that honors class. Now, this is like very interesting that I applied to state school and got waitlisted. Like, I didn't even get into University of New Hampshire like right away. And I did get in eventually, but that changed everything for me. Everything. That like, I went to college, it was like game on. Like, no one thought I was capable of this. I'll show you. So, I did very well in college and went and got my master's degree and, taught and then, ended up getting my doctorate in education as well. But it's just so interesting because I don't know where I would have gone without her. And so long story short, like, I write UDL now. It's in its second edition, right? I'm currently writing the third edition. And I'm like, I'm going to dedicate this to Mrs. Krause, who I haven't seen or talked to in like 20 years. And so I do, like, in the acknowledgement, it's like, Mrs. Krause, you believed in me before like anyone else believed in me academically. Like, I had some awesome teachers who I loved, but no one ever said you're capable of so much more than this. And so I track her down on Facebook. I'm taking you out to dinner. So we go out to dinner and I'm like, Mrs. Krause, this is dedicated to you. You changed my life. And she's like, what did I do? I'm like, oh, Mrs. Krause. Like, I wrote that college essay. And she's like, I actually remember what you wrote that college essay about. Right. And I'm like, like, this is the woman I want to be. And then I say, and then you put me in honors. And she's like, what? I'm like, Mrs. Krause, you put me in honors. She's like, I don't remember that part. I'm like, that was the origin story. You don't remember that part. And she's like, oh, I knew everyone could have been an honor student. Like, I was always advocating for like, why are we separating kids? And, so like when I had students who I just like, I saw potential in everyone, but like, I couldn't like bust it right away. I was a guinea pig. I was a cog in the machine to eliminate leveling. And she's like, no, you were brilliant. But like, everyone deserves that experience. And like, that's what I was trying to like advocate for, is like, you take students and you say you're capable of this and they're capable of that. And so I was like, okay, now this is the most depressing day in my whole life, Mrs. Krause. But no, I love her. And that's where it started. And I always said, that's the person that I need to be for my students, for my colleagues, and what I loved about it is she didn't blow smoke. She's like, you have a ton of work to do on conventions and style, but the ideas are there. And I think that we just need to be really honest with people of like, this is what you're amazing at. And these are some things that we're going to work on together. And how do we clear a pathway so that you find the lane that you need to get to where you want to go?
That's wonderful. And that's such a wonderful story. And it's such a great way to reflect on a teacher, because all it takes is just that belief. And I think one of the things that you're talking about right now that really strikes me is that oftentimes it's like, well, no, you can't, you're not at that level. We need to keep you here. Or no, you can't read that book because that book is out of your level. And you're just completely just holding the kid back and not really allowing them to learn or to try. And then they just become programmed, or as they move on from year to year. And here you have a teacher that said, you know what, you can do it. Let's go ahead. Let's give it a shot. I'm here with you. I'm going to go ahead and support you. And I mean, look at you, and look at what you've done. And maybe a countless other, or peers that you had also might have had that same experience, and other teachers that may do the same thing. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. As you talked about universal design, I was mentioning in the pre-chat, I was listening to the podcast you did with Kathleen Tucker, and I just, really fell in love with the subject. And because a lot of the what you described was practice that I did while I was still in the classroom, although I didn't know that it was UDL, but some of the same concepts and that same understanding of really not separating students and just say, oh, these are my low kids, these are my high kids, these are my advanced kids, but really mixing them up and having them learn from one another, and kind of pushing those that may need a little bit of help, like we like to call the gut kids, the ones in the middle, to move up. And then of course the ones that may be seen or thought of as low to move up, but just mixing them up. So I know you mentioned something in that episode that really just resonated with me, that you said, what is good for one is good for all, something along those lines.
Yeah. So like, if you're going to make something available to someone because it is necessary, then you're going to allow it as an option for everyone. So let's just think coffee shop here, right? So if a coffee shop only gave coffee with creamer, you're excluding anyone who's lactose intolerant. You're excluding anyone who's vegan, right? And so you say, well, I own a coffee shop and I want to make sure that people come in regardless of their dietary needs. So I'm going to make sure that I have almond milk available. I'm going to make sure that I have soy milk available, right? But I don't have to show my damn lactose intolerant card to get the soy milk. It's just available to everyone. And so when we think about our classrooms, there are some students who we know might need audio support in order to comprehend grade level text. Put it on the damn coffee shop menu, right? And like, one of the things that we think about in UDL is like, what really is the goal here? The goal is that like you understand how this author crafts dialogue or something like that, right? And so it's like, I know that there are some students who cannot yet decode text at grade level. Just like I know at a coffee shop, some people cannot consume creamer, right? So I'm going to say, all right, I could do this high tech, right? Because we're in my ed tech life, right? And I could record my voice using like voice recording software. Better yet, I can bribe my sweet, sweet students to do that for me. Like, who wants to hang out at lunch? I'll bring out the hot chocolate bar. Or I can actually go super low tech and say, okay, we're going to go through this text. This is a short text. And as we go through it, I have it digitally, and I know it's a little robotic, but you can use the read aloud feature, or you can translate it, and we'll do some translanguaging, is read it first in L1 and then come back and read it and listen to it in English. And, or you can read it silently on your own, and, or you can choose a partner and have that partner read it to you, right? I'm providing lots of different pathways to access that same text. And what we often see is teachers are like, I have an audio already, but I only give it to students who have an IEP. Or, I only allow the students to have it digitally who are L1 because I don't want them reading it in their first language. If I am in any country and you don't acknowledge and celebrate that English is my first language, you are cutting me off from a lot of information in another language, because my background information is in L1. And so it's like, allow me to build that schemata, and then I will go in absolutely, and I can read it in another language. But so it's about really intentionally saying, what is the goal and what are the barriers? And then saying, I know that some or a student might need this. And now I can say to students, all right, think about how you're doing today. Are you tired? Like, I'm sure that some of you are just like in a super unpleasant place where you're angry or you're drained or you're frustrated. I know that some of you might be in a really pleasant place where you're feeling like you're ready to challenge yourself today, or you're just feeling chill. Here's your options. Like, what are you going to choose today? And why is that what you need? And like, that is so much more affirming of identity. It's so much more inclusive. It's so much more equitable. And it's really about just saying that, like, if we recognize that there is a tool that one student might need, why wouldn't we make it available to everyone?
Yeah. And so, that's one of the things that for me that I have seen, and especially, and I'm just going to use an example and I'm going to throw it out there. It's with math, I am a big well, okay. When I transitioned into teaching, I taught the way that I learned, which was a standard algorithm. But it wasn't until now working in this position as an instructional technologist and actually working with our math specialist, who is a big fan of algebra tiles, the concrete, pictorial, and abstract. I have been able to see, and then I feel like, oh my goodness, I've done a disservice to my students if I would have known how to use the base 10 blocks and the manipulatives. That would have served my students a lot better, because it would have been great for all of them to be able to do that. Because like you said, oftentimes we just say, oh, well, those manipulatives, those are just for these students here. And that support and those diagrams and that little folder, that's only for those students. But I like what you said, that even the top students, you don't know how they may be coming in that day. You don't know how they may be feeling. So although they may be seen in the advanced group, maybe they're just having a bad day and just say, hey, you know what? I just want to try it a different way. I want to see that way. I want to do the manipulatives, or I want to, do the audio book, and listen to it and things of that sort. So, one of those things is one of those battles is how the manipulatives are seen as just for the lower tier kids and not for everybody as a whole. And then they think, well, since they're let's say a kid that receives services, well, the teacher that gives the services will take care of that. But according, at least through MTSS, what I understand is like, the teacher is the first line, in introducing that. And I know here in Texas, they do things where if the teacher, the general ed teacher, is not introducing those tools, they're not going to be able to be used on the state exam. But like I said, the mentality is always like, well, we'll just let the teacher handle that when they get pulled out, and I'll just go about my lesson. So what are some ways that you, or suggestions that you may have to overcome that barrier, or how can we do things better?
So, I mean, first of all, you can't intervention your way out of weak tier one. It's not ever going to happen. So the idea of MTSS is almost like a snowman, right? Like, I know that Texas isn't super snowman-y weather right now, but like you have your base, and then like you build another giant snowball and you put it on top, right? And then you build another one, you put it on top. And a multi-tiered system of support is like you're supplementing, you're adding on top. You're not supplanting, you're not taking away anything. And so it's like, how do we ensure that all students have equitable access to the first best instruction? And general education teachers are evaluated on teaching all students, which means that you're providing those pathways for students to really self-differentiate their learning. And then in addition to that, there are going to be some students who will also receive specially designed instruction or reading services or math intervention or behavioral or social emotional support. And so when we're thinking about those multi-tiers, it's not like, well, that kid is a tier 2 kid and now they're not in tier 1. Is like the system works because some students are getting additional support, and that support is in addition to a really robust, universally designed tier 1 environment. And so, I think that a lot of it comes down to, I know that there's this incredible pressure of like the test, but the test, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, like, okay, I'm just going to step back in a second here. Here's the thing about the darn test, right? The test is inaccessible. Let's just call it like it is, right? The Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the federal legislation, said that state standardized tests should be universally designed. They're not yet. They're absolutely improving. They're becoming more flexible, but these tests are not yet culturally responsive, and they're not yet accessible to all students. So if we could work out the kinks of accessibility and the kinks of cultural responsiveness, you would do well on that test as long as you understood your standards. Like, what is it that you have to know? What is it that you have to be able to do? And by teaching in an inaccessible way, not only is the test out of reach because the test has its own issues, is that they don't know what they need to know and they can't do what they need to do. And so it's like, we have to make sure that students truly have the knowledge in order to learn it like at high levels, and that they have the skills. And if I need to teach that in a really flexible way so they understand it, then I can begin to scaffold away from those things. But to start off by saying, nope, this 3 hours of this child's life, which in no way represents anything real in this world, is going to be so important that I am going to create this like really inaccessible classroom. It doesn't make sense. Build all of these scaffolds in, allow students to check their work with calculators, provide the solution keys, give manipulatives, allow them to work together. And once we have evidence that they are able to do it with those supports, then we start moving away from some of those supports, right? That's like the nature of scaffolding is we build these buildings and we do not keep these scaffolds up forever, but like we need them at first to build the skills. And so it's kind of recognizing that in a classroom, I'm always going to make them available, but there might come a time, like I was an English teacher and, I would say, okay, like I want all of you to feel like you know how to organize your writing. And so like when we're writing, I'm always going to show you some examples. We'll do some non-examples together. There's going to be some graphic organizers. There's going to be some sentence stems, right? And you might want to start with these, but like eventually this is going to become more comfortable. And in about a month, I'm going to challenge you to actually not grab the graphic organizer, but to recreate it yourself. Because on this silly little assessment at the end of the year, which you're going to nail because you're going to know all of this work, right? Is they're not going to I can't give you one, but there's nothing that says that you can't make one yourself. So let's get comfortable with this graphic organizer. And then, certainly I have them available, but like, I'm going to challenge you every once in a while to say like, can you do it without it? And it would be the same thing with manipulatives. Is they're like available. And once a student is successful, then you say like, see what you can do for the next 10 minutes without it. And like you're kind of moving away from that over reliance. And so that's one part. If we're worried about the test, if we can erase the test from our collective brains, then we end up with the fact that I can use any of those tools in my real successful life whenever the heck I want to use them. Like whenever I write, it's like I use Grammarly, I use spell check, I'll send it to all of my friends and ask for a peer review. I cite other people's work. Like that allows me to do research if I don't know something. Like in real life, I can use any scaffold I want, voice to text, spell check, and like people saying that we need to prepare students for real life. You're not preparing students for real life. You're preparing students for like a 2-hour test. That's the only thing we're preparing them for. And it's just heartbreaking that that's the master we serve right now. And, I'm on the army to try to we either have to eliminate them or make them more accessible. And I'm totally okay with accountability if that accountability is fair and equitable. And right now it isn't yet.
No, and I agree with you 100%. As far as being a math teacher, there's always math teachers that are like, no, you can't use the calculator yet, and yet on the test, they're allowed to use the calculator, but the teachers don't bring out the calculator till maybe a month before the test. The student is not familiar with the calculator because they've never used it. And the test with the calculator, it's so easy. You would have less issues, less problems, more success rate. And instead now you're having retesters that are going through special calculator class, where they learn the actual calculator method. And now on the retest, they're doing amazing. But had they had access to those tools at the very beginning, we wouldn't see these problems. But I think it's just that mentality of this is the way I was taught. I was taught to do it without a calculator. But in the real world, like you said, hey, I've got my phone, I'm checking my calculator, I'm doing whatever it is that I need to do to find and being resourceful instead of preparing them, like you said, for that test. All right. So Katie, let's talk a little bit then. What can we do better as a district? I mean, what are some of the things that maybe when you come in and work with a district, what are some of the barriers that you may see that may need to be overcome? And let's talk about administrators first. And then let's talk about teachers when it comes to UDL.
So, I think the big thing is like recognizing what it is and what it is not, because I think there's a lot of misconception about what UDL is. And there's a lot of like, oh, I'm already doing that kind of mentality. And to say that you do UDL is to like say that you run, which means nothing. You have to keep running, right? Like I'm a long distance runner and like I can go, oh yeah, I'm running already. But like, I have to keep running to say I'm a runner. And so like this concept of like, oh, we're already doing this, we don't need this, is often like not a recognition of what UDL really is, and that the result of UDL is expert learning. That's the goal. And so if we as educators are always the ones that are saying like, these are your options and this is what I will allow, or we're telling students what to do, then we're going to end up with a model that's much more focused on compliance than it is on like deeper learning and, innovation and creativity. So from an administrator perspective, what I always say is like, I like to have opportunities to work with administrators to help them understand what UDL is and what UDL is not. It is not differentiated instruction, but it works beautifully with differentiated instruction when you use these blended learning models. But like having administrators recognize what it is and then model it for teachers, because there's nothing worse than being a teacher in a district that's like, make sure you provide all these options and choices to students, make sure it's super flexible, make sure there's conditions of nurture. Oh, and your faculty meeting is me giving a PowerPoint for an hour while you listen. Like those two things can't coexist. And so if we want to see more inclusive practices in the classroom, we need to see more inclusive practices in professional learning. And so, I start off usually by just saying like, anytime you provide instruction, anytime that you're providing any sort of explicit instruction, there's things you have to share. What are the barriers with that? And, it's like, some people like going into meetings have this huge anticipation anxiety of like, what's the point of this? What are we even doing? And so we can minimize that barrier by sending out agendas a week ahead of time. We can encourage people to print out the slides ahead of time. We can give people copies of the slides. We can allow people to sit or stand or have snacks. We can be very clear about the fact that this is going to take me about 10 minutes and I'll give you 10 minutes to do this, right? Instead of saying turn and talk, which some people think is miserable, you can say, this is really 5 minutes to reflect. You could either have a conversation, you can step outside and walk and talk, you can just write down some notes, you can go like, we need to be flexible about the actual instruction that we're providing to educators, because I think that one of the best ways to get teachers to feel safe enough to provide this flexibility in the classroom is to recognize its value, because they've experienced it in their own faculty meetings. And so when administrators always say like, where do I start? What do I tell teachers to, not like it's that simplistic, but what do I tell teachers to do? I'm like, oh no, nothing yet. You do it first, right? Like ask teachers for feedback about, was this meeting engaging? Was it meaningful? Do you think of me as like a really strong educator? What options and choices would help you to make better sense of this? And like when we start modeling that, we're creating an environment where you can say to teachers like, no, you try some of these things in your classroom. And there's often like a, do as I say, kind of not as I do. And, the thing about like what it looks like in a classroom is it's really about, if I did this in one way, who am I excluding? So if I was going to give information in a class and I was just going to say it once like this, right? I'm excluding anyone with hearing impairment. I'm excluding anyone with auditory processing, anyone who wasn't paying attention at that time, it's gone. Just by recording it, I've eliminated the attention issue. By recording it and adding closed captions, I've eliminated the audio issue. If I was doing this with visuals, I could make it more accessible. If I did it with visuals and paused and asked for questions and comments and interacted, and so it's really about saying, if I don't do this, who am I excluding? And so it's kind of the same thing when you're thinking about faculty, is that if I was to do this, who would be really bored or who would be really overwhelmed? I remember the first faculty meeting I went to that was really designed with a lens towards UDL. And we were adopting a new grade book, an online grade book. It had been collectively bargained. We all had to use it. And we had the dreaded vendor presentation, which I was like, oh my gosh, if this person walks me through how to log on, I might lose my mind. Right? I just can't, I feel pretty tech savvy. And it was sometimes you all get the same presentation. And it's you have people in the back that are like, oh my gosh, where's my knitting? And then some people who are like, you're going too fast, you're going too fast. And so we all went down to the room and the vendor was amazing. And they're like, okay, listen, I know y'all have to use this. And I know there's different comfort levels with technology. So there's 3 options. First option is I will literally sit here and walk you through how to log in, how to post your first grades. You can ask any questions you want, and I'm available to you way after, right? Your instructional technology specialist, also, we've already pre-met, and she's opened up when there were labs, right? There's this big computer lab in there. And then we have the digital directions, and I have these printed out directions. And if you want to go in there and kind of try it on your own, that person is going to be available. You can ask any questions, but it will allow you to do like a pace that's like kind of your own. And if you feel really confident, here's your packet, take it. And we're all going to meet back here, like the last 5 minutes, just to kind of check in and make sure we all got to the same place. And then you can sign up for an additional session if you wanted. And I'm like, oh my gosh, hallelujah. Right? It was like for me, that was so big, that one small thing. And like, it was like, okay. And, maybe you can't do it all the time. Like, I get it. Like that planning something like that, takes a little bit more time, but it was, all of us were like so excited about like, oh, like we get to do it how we want to do it, as opposed to like, you all have to do this step by step by step. And for me, that was the moment that like everything changed. I was like, I appreciate it so much. I want everyone to appreciate it.
Wow, that's great. And like you said, that was just a great example, like working with the administrators. And oftentimes, it's those presentations, it's just a long PowerPoint. There really isn't any you're not interacting, you're not getting that reflection, and you do miss a lot of information based on that. I want to touch on something that you mentioned prior, because you said that there is a difference between, differentiation. Can you explain that a little bit more as far as what you mean there?
Yeah. So universal design for learning is very proactive. It happens before there's learners in the room. And it's essentially about, how do I recognize the variability of the people I'm serving? What really is the goal? And then what are the potential pathways? And we're going to allow learners to self-differentiate. So they're going to be more self-aware. They're going to be more self-reflective, and they're actually going to make a choice. And then they're going to do something, right? So I'm just going to go back and just give like a really generic example of, let's say that I'm in a high school science class and I want all students to learn about the life cycle of stars and how within the life cycle of a star actually produces elements that like keeps us all alive here on Earth. And if that's what I want students to know, I might say, all right, everyone, so there's this textbook chapter. And we have the textbook online. And so you can either like take the class copy of the book and go through it. You can work by yourself or with a partner, or you can read it online. These are the questions that you're going to have to answer about the life cycle. Or I've kind of flipped the classroom and I've done a lecture myself where you can go on and you can access it. It's closed captioned and you can slow it down or speed it up. Again, same questions. You can write the answers or you can type the answers. Or here's this super, super crazy article that I'm having a hard time getting through myself, where NASA explains it. And like, just see what you can do with it. It's fascinating that some people read this and understand it. So like, feel free to dive into that, right? So make your choices, right? And so like, students are kind of making their own choices. And then I say, and then you're going to answer those questions. And you can either answer them by writing them like down in like kind of a more cohesive narrative, or you can record a video, or you can do a podcast. But this is the rubric that I'm going to use regardless, right? So I am watching students potentially make really irresponsible choices, right? Like, we don't always make great choices. Like, it's just human nature. So it's like, okay, think about like, what are you going to choose and why are you going to choose it? And that's really important, building in that like metacognitive piece. So first, I'm having them make a decision about, how do you want to learn this? Hard copy book, really tricky article, watch my video, right? Maybe it's going to be a combination of those, because the questions really are here. And then now share the answers to those questions. Now, at this point, I have a bunch of data that maybe some of my kids have no idea about a life cycle of a star. And some of them have like actually made sense of that NASA article, and some are kind of in between. And that's when I need to be responsive and go, oh my, this group right here, like, I want to get them together and I want to like give them a question and challenge them a little bit more. This group right here has no idea how elements are produced from the evidence that I am reading or listening to or whatever. I need more time with them for explicit instruction, right? And so this is where, like, if you learn blended learning models, this kind of comes into place, because then I'm going to do like a station rotation. And I'm going to put them in 3 groups. And differentiated instruction is essentially when a teacher is differentiating the product or the process or the content for students based on evidence. So everyone has had an opportunity to reflect, to be an expert learner, to think about what they need. But ultimately, if learning and growth did not happen, I am responsible for that and have to do something. So that's when I'm going to then differentiate instruction and say, okay, I've made my 3 groups for today. And those groups change all the time, because it's literally based on like the standard. It's not like, now I'm going to pull all my, all the, like, as you're saying, like, I'm going to take all the struggling readers now. No, it's like the kids who didn't comprehend that text given all these accessibility options. And so I then might say, okay, this is my red group, this is my yellow group, this is my, pink group, whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm going to pull red first with me 15 minutes. Everyone else, now that you understand that, now you're going to start on, whatever it happens to be. But like, I'm now going to pull this group to say, you 5, I think, are struggling with this. So let me explain it better, right? That's differentiated instruction. And there's a place for that, absolutely. And so it's just, if you always started there, if you always immediately separated students, they don't have the same opportunities to learn the grade level instruction. They don't have the same opportunities to be reflective and to be more expert in their learning. They don't have opportunities to really think about what they need based on just their social emotional kind of space in that day. But I can't let it go too far if the decisions that they made are not, they're not resulting in high levels of learning. And so I always basically say, like, start by universally designing the lesson where there's flexible ways for students to learn, the materials they're going to use, and flexible ways they can share what they know, if it's appropriate by the standard, right? Because if the standard says write a informative text, video is not on there anymore, because I actually need to assess the writing. But if it's explain the life cycle of a star, I have a lot of wiggle room to say, explain it in writing, explain it in video, explain it in a damn stop motion video if you want to. It's just, these are the questions you have to answer, and this is the rubric I'm using to assess you. And when there is evidence that you have not met that criteria for success, I will differentiate the support for you. So it's really, the difference is UDL is about designing it so students can self-differentiate their learning, and differentiated instruction is how we are responsive to evidence to provide more targeted feedback and instruction or acceleration to students who need it.
And I love that. And thank you so much for explaining that. I mean, that just makes things a lot clearer, because oftentimes it's like, oh, well, I'm doing universal design for learning because I have my kids in these groups. But, how effective are you in those groups? And oftentimes, teachers, it's like you say, oh, it's always the same group of struggling kids. And then you've got your mids, and then you've got your advanced kids, but they all just stay in that same groups the whole time. They never get moved around. So but I love, like you said, if you look at the standard, and this is something that I was even honest that we had a training maybe about a month ago on mentoring, and coming in from business background, I kind of just fell into teaching, and I fell absolutely in love with it, and just taught the way that I taught. But I always try to find different ways within my wheelhouse to be able to teach and give instruction. But it wasn't until my last 5 years in the classroom where I really started honing in those skills and really learning a little bit more on how to unpack a standard. And so I love what you said, where if the standard says you explain, it's like one thing that I tell teachers, it's like, you have a sandbox that you can play in, because they don't teach you how to teach the standards. But if they tells you to explain, like you said, offer multiple modalities for that. They want to feel comfortable with a Google slide, if they feel comfortable with a video, if they feel comfortable, writing it down or drawing a picture, as long as it meets that rubric and what the student is supposed to do. You have a learning artifact, you have evidence for learning. And then you as a teacher can go back and assess that and say, hey, you know what? I noticed that you 3 here have this misconception. Like you said, you pull those. And oftentimes what I started finding out is, in the last 3 years in my classroom, the more that I was able to do that, my pull out little groups got smaller, where before, instead of having the whole class and reteach the whole class, and then you've got Johnny who's in the front, who's just bored because he understands it, but I'm reteaching and droning everything on. Now I've got my little small group, and now it's like those 3 or 4 kids. And in a matter of like a 5-minute explanation, boom, the little light bulb goes off, and they're like, oh. And oftentimes I found myself that it was maybe the way that I explained it, although the other kids did well, because they're like, oh, they picked up on it. But then it was like, okay, let's look at it differently. Let's see things. And then that was it. And it was so amazing just to be able to see that in the classroom where the students were, and these are students that just their confidence level went up. They had that psychological safety where, hey, it's okay, I messed up, but hey, now I understand it now, and they can explain it to one another, and it just built a great community, and it was just amazing. So thank you so much for really explaining that difference there and what differentiation is, because oftentimes, like I said, we differentiate and just say, oh, well, these are my low kids and that's it. We're just going to keep them here, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So very interesting there. So, tell us a little bit more. I know as we're kind of wrapping up on the tail end of the show, best advice that you can give, just for a teacher that is interested in this, where can they start? I did share your website, but what are some things that possibly that you can just share within your classroom? I know you gave a lot of examples, but this is where I'm going to come at you and say, I know that a lot of teachers will say, well, I wish I had enough time to do that. I need to be teaching.
Yeah.
But a lot of this stuff it's things that they're already doing, but they just may not know they're doing it. So what is some advice right now, especially during this time where teachers feel overwhelmed? What are some of the things that you're seeing, and how can you help them kind of just put them at ease a bit as far as UDL is concerned?
So like there's two kind of different buckets of this. Like one is put the kids to work, right? Literally take your lesson exactly as you designed it, exactly as you were going to teach it. And just say like, oh, this is actually a little assessment where the students were going to explain blah, 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 blah. And I was going to have everyone do a Google slideshow. Just stop and say, is there another way that we could do this? And my son's kindergarten teacher did this. Literally, like she was like, that was so cool. She was like, okay, everyone, like we're going to practice math facts. Like we sometimes do math fluency with really young learners. And it's like the standards say you count, up to 1 to 20, right? So it's like, you got to do a lot of counting within 1 and 20. And so she's like, okay, so you can either go on IXL Math, which is just an adaptive solution where kids can go on and practice, or you can do kind of your Make 10 flashcards, right? So it's like, would you rather be on a device or would you rather play a game with a friend? Or is there anything else that we can do? Boom, right there, zero prep, right? And give it 2 or 3 minutes. And one of the kids was like, I like to make tests and then take them. So this little lovey makes himself these worksheets and then like takes them and then corrects them. And she's like, what a fun third idea. Boom, done. And so like sometimes it's just asking your learners, is there another way we can do this? And then don't think about universally designing the lesson. Think about universally designing the strategies. Next time you have a text that you want students to read, you'll probably either ask them to read it silently, or you will read it out loud, or have students kind of bump around and read it out loud. Just give them the choice. In the next 15 minutes, you need to consume this text. Would you prefer to silently read it or join me over here and I will read it out loud? Boom, easy, no prep. Next time you're going to say to students, turn and talk to your partner. Is discussion truly the outcome, or is it just processing? Because if it is, next time you're going to say turn and talk, you say, if you want to turn and talk, stand up. If you'd prefer to write down the answer, stay seated. People who are standing up form small clusters. You have 2 minutes, right? So sometimes it's like that, because it's like you say, reading silently is a real barrier for some kids because they're not decoding at grade level. Me listening to you read when I have the text in front of me is like painstaking. It's like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to read ahead of your voice anyway, right? And so we just think about like, is that really a great practice for all students? What really is the purpose here? And so I think it's about like, think about the strategies you use all the time and just say, I normally do it this way. Is there one other way that I can do it? And again, you don't even need to come up with that way. Like you could say to students, is there another way that you think that we could do this? And that brings in so much about like student voice. And it's like, I think that sometimes as educators, we feel responsible for doing all that prep. Like you can actually do the prep with your learners, is to say, generally, I have everyone do this. Let's talk about it for literally 2 minutes. Can you think of another way that we could do this? And not like we're all going to switch, but like, make an argument. Like I could maybe try it this way and be like, yeah, sure, let's try it. And you might blow it. And that's awesome. If it works, you know what works. If it doesn't work, you know one thing not to try.
There you go. I love it. It's just like I tell my teachers, hey, just get clicky with it and nothing's going to happen. Just have some fun and just click refresh or click back and you're going to be fine. You know, just
need to plug it back in. It works every time.
There you go. Well, Katie, this has been amazing. And like I said, now that we're kind of at the tail end of the show, these are some of the questions that I like to lead out the show with. So I know I completely forgot to send you these to kind of prep for, but
ready.
But it's okay. I know you're ready and you're ready to rock. So here's one question that I'd love to ask you is, what is your edu kryptonite? What is it that just weakens you right now? As far as, is it something, a practice in education right now that is just like I hear about that. And it's like that, that kryptonite that weakens Superman. Is there anything out there right now that you're seeing as you work with school districts and, and you're connecting with other educators?
Like I would say the hardest thing that I have, and I talked about this a little bit, is people who are building their entire career and practice around big business standardized tests. When like this work is about kids and this work is about learning, and George Koros, one of my besties, who I know that, you're going to have an opportunity to chat with sometime. He always says, you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. And like, we're just focusing so much on numbers and not that what those numbers represent. Like this work is about learning. It's not about like the actual numbers. And I am such an advocate of being really evidence informed and using like multiple forms of data to make decisions about like what students need, but it represents kids. And I think that sometimes kids are getting lost in these numbers. And, whenever it's like, but what about the test? But what about this? And it's like, the question needs to be like, what do we need to do so children, the children who we serve, feel like they belong and have access to grade level instruction and are learning at high levels? And like, yes, if all of those things were true, if kids felt like they belonged, if kids were growing and learning at high levels, if they had opportunities for like true, deeper, culturally responsive, trauma-informed learning, I promise you those numbers are going to go up. But like right now, we're focused more on numbers than the children they represent. And that's always a hard conversation for me.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And I see that day in and day out. And it's just like, but that's the way that the system is right now. But I'm right there. I'm right there with you. Like you say, we just, there's nothing wrong with the assessment part, but sometimes it's just the system it really frustrates me sometimes. And, but that's the way we're at right now. All right. So Katie, here's the next question. If you can turn any of your hobbies that you're passionate about into a full-time job, what would it be and why?
I mean, honestly, I've always loved to write. I was like that super, super cheesy kid who had like notebooks of like poetry and writing, right? And I love to write. And like growing up, that was like my crazy dream job. Like, like everyone's going to be a professional athlete or a famous actress. I was going to be a famous writer, right? And I love to write. And I feel like so incredibly blessed to be able to actually make part of my living writing, because I like sit down, I'm like in Chicxulub's flow anytime I like sit down to write. That like I could sit down and like it happened a couple of weeks ago. I was like sitting down and I schedule writing in my schedule every single week. And I'm like sitting down and my husband's like, hey, go and drop something off the post office. Can you order do you want a coffee? I'm like, yeah. He's like, you want to order it on your phone? I'm like, yeah. And literally he like called me and he's like, did you order it? And I'm like, yeah, I was going to order it. You just left. He's like, okay, it's been like an hour. Like, it's literally like, I will lose myself. Like I thought he had left like 5 minutes before and I'm like, So I absolutely love writing. And I feel like I could sustain it. I'm also a runner. It's like a huge part of my identity. I love running. This is super exciting. My oldest son, who's 12, he and I are running a half marathon on Saturday. And this is like his first long distance race. I've done like halves and full. And my goal next year is to do an ultra. And he was like couch to half marathon in 3 months. It was amazing. So he runs with me all the time. But I don't know if I'd want that for a job because I wouldn't want to run like 40 hours a week.
No, but I mean, you've got the writing done. You have 10 books out, and who knows how many more you'll bring out, but I'm sure that they're all going to be great. And like you said, it's just amazing that your passion for writing is, is part of what you do. And that's just amazing. So that's wonderful. All right. Last two questions. First one is, if you can have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
Adopt, rescue puppies.
Okay. There you go. There you go. Cue in the song and the background song and everything. That's that commercial always tears me up. As much as I try and fight it, my eyes get watery every time.
So we foster puppies. Like that's our thing. So I do have a dog. We adopted him when he was 9. He's 12. So we adopt elderly, but we foster little puppies. And, I have much more important platforms in my life, clearly, where it's like make standardized testing accessible would be like the real one. But like, I'm just going with I think that life would be better if we all snuggled puppies.
There you go. There you go.
I mean, that's not super inclusive because I know that some of the listeners might have some allergies. So just so you know, there's things like poodles that are non-allergens.
There you go. Great. There you go. I love that. All right, Katie. And last question. If this was your podcast and I was your guest, what would be one question you'd like to ask me?
Because that's a good one. I'm a little like a loose cannon. So it would be something like... Okay, I think this is such a cool. Tell me the best 2 books you've read this year. It can be education or not education. Like it could be murder mystery. It could be like 30 Days of Gratitude. Like what are 2 books that are super memorable you've read?
The best 2 books that I have read are one of them is by my dear friend Mike Earnshaw, who is a principal, and he wrote the Educulture Cookbook. And it was just amazing. And what I love about it is he was actually a line cook, like almost a chef. And so he ties that passion, like kind of like the way you do your passion for writing, he tied that passion into this book. And they're just recipes on how to build culture with the teachers, make the afternoon meetings a lot more fun, just having a great time with your teachers, communicating, all of these activities that not only translate well from the administrative standpoint, but also some of those lessons are great that you can even integrate into the classroom with the students, and you're building up that culture. And I loved it. So that was one of my favorites. The other book also that I just finished reading is by Brian Aspinall. And I can't remember the title of his book, but it's the latest one that he came out where he talks about his passion. And man, I just loved his writing, just speaking right from the heart, his story of almost like, hey, you're never going to make a kid out of this town. And the amazing things that he's doing with Codebreaker. And it was just so inspiring to hear his journey and overcome those obstacles. And so those were right now my 2 favorite books that I can often go back to as well. And then I'm going to throw one extra one in there also that I just finished recently because it really helped me open up my eyes to some of my instructional design practice, which was What I Wish I Knew Before I Became an Instructional Designer by Dr. Luke Hobson.
He's a friend of mine.
Exactly. He told me that he knows you, and he had your stuff in his book, and it was just amazing. So that was a book that I just finished this last week. And it was just amazing. And it just opened up my eyes to this whole new thing. Really what I was already doing, but it just really validated what I was doing. And it just really inspired me to continue in that practice and to continue to grow. So I gave you a bonus book there that I just finished reading. So it's awesome. So, and he is going to be on the show. I do have him scheduled. So I'm really excited. Yeah, I've been able to connect with him, and he's just wonderful. And he was so nice that he actually gave me a proof of concept of his book. Like I told him, because what I love to do is I love to support, educators out there. And I say, hey, if you have an autographed copy, let me know. I will purchase and pay shipping because I love to support my community. And he's like, well, I don't have but I have the proof of concept. And he just sent it to me. And I love the way he dedicated. He just put stay nerdy. I love it.
I love you. He's so awesome.
Yes, he is awesome. Well, Katie, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for coming on here, sharing your passion. Thank you so much for allowing me also to learn more about UDL. And I have been sharing your website there in the chat, but I know this will also be in the show notes. So I encourage all our listeners currently right now, people that are watching, those that are going to be rewatching or listening to the show, please make sure you check out that link, check out the website, get you some of the books. Katie, I'm going to ask you honestly, what would be the number one book that you would suggest right now for somebody that is just learning about UDL and would love to, again, learn more about it and start the practice?
So, right now, again, I this is like a great transition just because I know that you're going to be working with George too, is my dear friend, George Koros. What we did in the book, Innovate Inside the Box, is it's a super introduction to UDL, but the first part of it is to talk about that UDL builds on this core of like really deep relationships and like understanding the empowerment of learners and what it means to be evidence informed. And we teach together at University of Pennsylvania in like a certificate program. And I think that what people need right now is a reminder of that core, is that like we can use any strategy we want, but like if we don't love our learners and we're not close to our colleagues and we're not really thinking about the impact that we have on our learners, that like the strategies aren't gonna land. And so I think that like right now, especially Innovate Inside the Box is a great place to start, because it's like, why are we doing this work? How important is it to like really get to know our learners? And then think about now, what are some very first steps that we can take with Universal Design for Learning?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for your recommendation. And again, audience members, you heard it. Check out the book, Katie Novak, George Koros, dynamic duo. You're definitely going to get your reading worth out of it. And of course, the knowledge nuggets. And, you can actually take all that and sprinkle it on to what you already do great and just take it to that next level and serve it up. So thank you so much, Katie, as always. And all our audience members, thank you again. As always, next week, we have a special show. It is our 100th episode, and I get to have George Koros on the show. And I am so excited because it is a wonderful way to end my first season, my first 100 shows. And again, this could not have been done without the support of every single one of you that have believed in my passion, that have believed in what I'm doing. And we're just going to continue to do our best to bring you the best each and every single time with all of our guests and all of our topics. But as always, I ask you, visit our website, myedtech.life. Give us a review, drop us a line, send us a DM. I'm always looking for feedback, anything that I can do better for you guys, any guests or suggestions as well. Please let us know. We would love to have just a variety of people on here and a variety of topics, because as you know, My EdTech Life is all about bringing educators and creators together one show at a time. So thank you guys for tuning in tonight. And again, next week, 100th episode, George Koros will be on the show. Katie, again, thank you so much. And my friends, don't forget, until next time, stay techie.